Hi guys, welcome to Forum. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. We're really excited to welcome Matt Skibiak, who's here with us today to talk about working far from home. He's currently a creative director at Arts and Letters right here in Richmond and a fellow Brandcenter alum. So I'm going to pass it off to Cam to tell you a little bit more about him.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Hi, everybody. I'm Cam, and I'm a second-year art director. I'm also incredibly excited to hear from Matt today. And fun fact, he actually grew up in Kenya before graduating from Brandcenter as a copywriter in 2013. And from there, he moved to Portland and worked at Wieden & Kennedy on brands like Facebook, Powerade, TurboTax. Then he moved to Wieden & Kennedy Shanghai for 2 years in 2019, where he is fairly certain that he unintentionally made propaganda after one of his campaigns was promoted by the state-sponsored newspaper.
Hi, guys.
Sorry, go ahead, take it away, Matt.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Emma, you were totally right. That waiting period would have been really awkward without music. So that was nice to have that. I'm really excited to chat with you guys. Super excited that you get to talk to Rachel Mercer and Eric Hallman in the next couple of weeks. I saw that was kind of lined up afterwards, and that's great. But I want to talk to you guys a little bit about working far from home. Like was said earlier, I worked in the Shanghai office for the Shanghai Wieden office for about 2 years. And it was an incredible experience, and I want to kind of share a little bit of that. But before I kind of begin, I want to, I had this like realization throughout the course of my career that like this job done well and done right can be like a little bit of a scam in a great way. When I was at grad school at Brandcenter, I had a professor there who taught us a trick. It wasn't really teaching a trick. It was just like, you know what, if you guys are ever stuck and you don't know what to write, open your script in a city or a country you really want to go visit. And so I took that to heart. And I remember my first year at Wieden, I wrote a script that took place in Thailand. And somehow the script was bought and sold, and we ended up going there. And I remember, within like a few months of that happening, we were in Thailand, and we were in the island and some island off of Thailand out in the middle of nowhere. And I was with some friends and a producer, my creative partner, and we came to this realization that like it almost felt like we were getting paid to be on vacation at that time. And it's a pretty amazing thing. And it's not just about like, these kind of experiences that you get to have along the way, but you get to the thing that I kind of love about working in advertising is I end up getting to work with really talented filmmakers. You get to work with actors. You get to work with your favorite musicians. You get to work with people who have edited Academy Award-winning movies. I mean, it really is a fascinating thing. And it's not just about the people you get to work with, but there's also when you think about what advertising is in a way, and I had a professor or a creative director who once explained this to me. He's like, you're basically being given millions of dollars and a megaphone to say something. And that's kind of, when you think about what this job is, it's like when you have that sort of like reach and that power, the question becomes, what do you want to say? What do you want to do? And you can use it to kind of make culture. You can use it to kind of make the whole country relive their childhood for a moment. And of course, you can use it to actually say something, to make a powerful statement. But it's also, it's I used the word scam earlier on, but it's also, it's kind of a ticket. It's a ticket to be able to say these things. It's a ticket to be able to kind of go to anywhere else in the world, whether it's just for a production or a new city, but it's also a ticket to kind of go and live in that. And so today I want to just ultimately kind of talk about my experience with that. And maybe at least attempt to sort of answer this question of why you do a job That's not that easy. In a place you can't speak the language, don't know the culture, and barely know the history. I don't know if I will answer that question. I'll just tell you a little bit about what my experience was like, how I got there, and what I learned. And I think, you know, the biggest thing about it when it comes to traveling, whether it's a new city or whether it's a new country around the world, it's a little bit like the hero's journey. But instead of a hero, you're an advertising professional. You're just a normal human being. But that notion of growth, you know, you got to like go somewhere totally different. The hero's journey is you go somewhere, you change, and you return back a new person. And I think, you know, in the case of what I had with this, and I think anyone working overseas, and I think it's something to kind of think about, you have an opportunity for true like professional growth and also personal growth. The personal growth is just, you know, when you're surrounded by people from all different sorts of cultures, you learn to talk to people from different cultures. You learn a little bit about their different backgrounds, you learn about their history. I'm sure there are people in this meeting right now who aren't from the US, and you're kind of experiencing that yourselves. There's also this sense of what I loved about it was you get the sense of perspective and humility. You know, when it's easy to kind of, you know, be in your home country and kind of see the world revolve around your home country. And then when you are not at home and when you are surrounded by people who aren't at home, it gives you a very different sort of perspective, and you're able to see yourself differently. You're able to see your own country differently. And I think that sort of growth happens naturally just by virtue of kind of being placed in that cauldron. And I think, you know, the professional side of it as well is you're in particularly when I was living in Shanghai, you're kind of thrown into the thick of it. But you're going to learn to do this job differently. You're going to learn to work with people who've done it differently, who've you know, kind of been trained by different professionals. But you're solving different problems. You're solving different insights that you wouldn't solve in the US. And I think that sort of like racking of your brain inevitably is just going to help kind of change you. And that's kind of like the shtick of this. And what I'm going to, you know, kind of share with you guys is some of that stuff that I've learned, some of those experiences, and kind of how I feel like that changed me. And I think it's just kind of something to consider. And then at the end, we'll talk to some nuts and bolts sort of questions about how you actually like maybe can go out there, why you want to do it, what are some things to consider. But the first question, I think, ultimately is like, where the hell are you going to go? You could go anywhere, and you know, do you want to go to Europe? Do you want to go to Asia? Do you want to go to South America? The good news is there are advertising agencies all over the place, and I think what I would say is consider going somewhere you would never consider going. And I say this because this isn't anything novel, but it's this notion of like, particularly in our field, discomfort when it comes to growth in particular, but discomfort is kind of your friend. And this isn't, you know, a new sort of thought by any stretch of imagination. I'm sure you've had professors teach you this, or you've had people at Friday Forum come and say the same thing. But when you're kind of coming up with an idea, you know, and if that idea doesn't scare you, if it feels familiar, if it feels safe, probably not that great of an idea. So you kind of want to like gravitate towards the thing that feels a little bit unfamiliar. That sort of thinking is true. And I remember when I worked in the Portland office, one of the things I did to kind of try to always experience that sort of discomfort was move around with different CDs. When I got hired by two particular CDs. And, you know, of course, when I first got there, I had like serious imposter syndrome. At some point, I knew people were going to realize I didn't deserve to be there. And as a result, I worked incredibly hard to like hopefully trick them into thinking that I did. And it felt great. You know, you like at a certain point, you do start feeling a little bit more comfortable. And what I ended up doing whenever I started feeling that sort of comfort after a while, when I felt comfortable around my CDs, when I started feeling confident, I ended up trying to find new CDs. I wanted to push myself. I wanted to work with different CDs who didn't know who I was, potentially would think I was a hack. And so then I had to like force myself to work even harder to like prove, hopefully, that I wasn't. And I think that sort of again, that discomfort is something that kind of can affect the place that you want to go. I put this slide up here, consider going where you never consider going, and it might sound easy. It was not an easy decision for me to go to China, as you can imagine. In fact, the way it kind of ultimately happened was Wieden Kennedy has these different offices around the world. And occasionally they have this program where you can kind of do like a couple month stints, 2-month stints, 3-month stints, and you can work in these offices. And I thought, oh, that seems like a cool opportunity. Maybe one day I'd want to like go work in Europe, but I wasn't sure yet. And I thought, I really want to work in a place. I wanted to do one of these 3-month stints in a city that I knew I would never want to live in. Like I could handle a 3-month stint anywhere. And I thought, you know what, can I work like in one of the offices in a country I'd never want to live in, like China, for instance? And then a few months later, I ended up getting this offer to go work at the Shanghai office. And I remember my wife was, I came home and I told her, and I was like, oh, hey, I just got this job offer as to be the Nike CD in there. Isn't that great? And she goes, oh, that's so amazing. Congratulations. I mean, obviously we're not clearly going to do that, but that's great. It's got to feel good that they think that of you. And I was like, yeah, no, of course, we're definitely not going to do that, but maybe we could just talk about it for a little bit and talk with them and see. And the office, I think, kind of knew, rightfully so, that like not a lot of people, I think the idea of moving out there was something that kind of freaked a lot of people out. And so they said, well, why don't you go out there? Why don't we just pay for you to go out for a week and interview people, and you can kind of see if the place works for you. And again, in my mind, I was like, great, cool. This is like a week-long vacation. I'm obviously not going to go out there. So we flew out there, and I was blown away. I mean, it was nice to go there as like I knew it was going to be 1 week, because it was just, it was an amazing sort of place. But the city was not at all what I expected. It was thrilling to kind of be there. Seeing the office was really exciting. I interviewed there, and for me, it was a little bit of a sense, like I think over the course of the week, I started kind of embracing a little bit more. I met my boss, who was the new ECD there, and there were a couple things that I kind of like, in order for me to really like consider going there. I needed to know that my boss was somebody who had a good portfolio of work and kind of had good taste and I could gel with. And I also needed to see if I could figure out if the office, if I could make good work out there, because that was ultimately why I was going. It was partly for a little bit of life, but it was like I was following the work. And personally, I don't think the office had really done that much great work beforehand. And I needed to know kind of internally, like when I started speaking to the account people, did they think the work was good? And because if they did, then that was going to be kind of an issue. We were going to have different taste levels. But if they didn't, then they would kind of view this opportunity like me as kind of an opportunity. And so thankfully they didn't. They were like, no, we want to improve. And so it became this place where not only did it seem like it could be a kind of fun life adventure, but it also seemed like a place where it could be an exciting work opportunity as well. But again, my wife had just gotten this amazing job. She's a psychologist, and she'd just gotten this job at a main hospital there in Portland. And we weren't sure if we wanted to actually like go and do this. So I thought, all right, how about I just do like a 3-month stint? I'll get it out of my system, maybe do some work. So I went there and I did a 3-month stint. And I remember when I first got there, I was like a little bit terrified. I thought, my mind was like 3 months, I at least have like an escape plan. It's going to be great. But I got there in the first week and it was just chaos. I'd been like dropped into 3 different briefs. And, but within like a week or two, I kind of started figuring out like, I think this is going to end up like being something really exciting. So over the course of the 3 months that I worked there, it did the complete opposite of get it out of my system. I fell even more in love with the city. I remember specifically there was this moment we were working on. I was out for drinks with my colleagues, and I remember sitting there, and my partner was Spanish, my art director was Brazilian, and my copywriter was Chinese. And it was the 4 of us were sitting there, and I'm American, and the 4 of us were sitting there, and from totally different backgrounds, and we were having a great time working on a project and just kind of connecting on a level that I wasn't really experiencing in the States. And I remember leaving after those 3 months and driving to the airport and being sad that I was leaving and going back to the US and going back to my Portland office and feeling like I had just in the past 3 months just lived this like crazy life that I experienced and seen so much, and that my colleagues were still kind of, talking about the same thing, working on the same projects, and equally or kind of disgruntled, and I couldn't get this out of my head. And so finally, my wife and I chatted, and we thought, you know what, this seems like it could be a good work opportunity, but more than anything, it just seems like a fun adventure. Like, when else are we ever going to get to go and live somewhere for 2 years on the opposite side of the planet? So we decided to go and do it. And I remember signing the contract, and I was terrified. Um, and then I remember flying out there early, and I remember landing at nighttime and driving on a highway that looked like this, and then being taken at nighttime into where I was going to stay temporarily at night into a lane that looked like this. And I woke up the next morning, and I wasn't there for a 3-month stint. I was there for at least a couple of years. And I remember being terrified. I was like, what in the hell did I just do? My wife is quitting her job. She's going to come here. God, I hope this is the right decision. And within a couple of days, I started to remember why it is that I love the place. I remember it was like 2 days of like, it was dark and overcast, and I think that fed into my paranoia. And then the sun broke out, and I realized as I was like, this was kind of my commute basically from like where my house was to work. And I remember why it was that I fell in love with the place. And my commute essentially in Portland, like my life was completely flipped over. My commute went from being in Portland, Oregon, where I would take the same bus and see the same familiar stranger faces every single day, to my 7-minute commute, even though it was just a walk, was an adventure. I would see stuff I would never see otherwise. Every day I would see new people and see something different. My lunch went from eating kale salads in Portland to all of a sudden eating like wild foods from different regions I'd never even heard about before. And conversations went from kind of reliving these, ESPN highlights from the night before, to sitting around tables and talking to people from all over the world. And then within China, a country that at the time I knew pretty much nothing about, but I was fascinated by. And I got to meet people from different regions and different cities. And so every day was this sort of like this like growth opportunity. And so I knew fairly early on that from a life perspective, this was the right decision. But now from a work perspective, I knew as well, I was like equally as terrified. From a work perspective, I was like, all right, we got a lot of work to do. And at its core, cultural differences are real. Again, if anyone has ever traveled, I'm sure you feel this, but when it comes to work, even from the US and the UK, you're going to have huge cultural differences. You're going to have different senses of humor. You're going to have different philosophies, different outlooks, different personalities. Same's going to go when anywhere in Europe. But then those differences become even bigger, particularly when you're in a place like China or Asia. It's very different from the West. And when you're doing this job, and probably the past year or two for you guys at grad school was like this for me, you kind of learn all these tricks for solving a brief or creatively solving a problem. And I kind of always likened it to like having these quiver of arrows, right? Like if I'm about to solve something, it's like, okay, I'm going to flip it and see what happens if I do that. Or I'm going to use this cultural reference arrow and I'm going to solve the brief that way. Or I'm going to use this historical thing. Or, oh, here's a song. If I'm stuck, I can at least pull a song and use the lyrics to that song, which might help me get out of this problem. But you don't have that when you're in a place where people have very different senses of humor and they're very different cultural references. And so you're kind of like, the amount of arrows that you have are severely dwindled. And I'll give you just a couple quick examples of what that was like. So the first one was, I remember when I first got there, I was immediately working on a pitch for BMW. And at some point I presented some script to my ECD, and the script, I don't remember the details of it. And anyone who works on any sort of tech thing, at some point you're going to see a script about a dystopian future, machines taking over the world, blah, blah, blah. So that inevitably happened. So I was like, oh, here's this dystopian future script. And my ECD, who's from Hong Kong, she looked at it and she was like, this isn't going to make any sense here. I was like, what do you mean it's not going to make any sense? She's like, the whole idea of a dystopian future, it doesn't exist in China. In the West, you guys are really pessimistic about the future. You're scared about the future. But in China, we're optimistic about the future. And so the whole notion of a dystopian future just doesn't exist. And that blew my mind. The fact that you can not be terrified about what the future is going to hold blew my mind. And it was exciting because this insight was sort of a truth that not only infused itself in some of the work we did for Nike, but it infused itself across all the work. Another example of just kind of being out of sorts creatively in the beginning was just in terms of cultural references. I remember working with a team, and I wanted to, we were referencing a song or something, and I said, oh, I was working with two Chinese creatives, and I said, oh, the song, the theme song from Rocky, and they were like, no idea what Rocky is. I was like, okay. The theme song from Star Wars. No idea what Star Wars was. I was like, oh my God. And my strategist at the time was telling me, he's like, yeah, no. I kind of figure, okay, fine, you don't know Rocky, but Star Wars was crazy, but ultimately a lot of those cultural references you don't have, and I think it was a little terrifying at first, but ultimately it's the best thing that can happen, because when you don't have these, like, for lack of better words, these cheap, easy arrows, you're kind of left with one. And that's ultimately, it's like you're trying to find that big idea. And I think that when you're in an environment where you can't kind of like cultural reference or song your way out of a problem, you really have to like hit a truth, and you have to hit a big idea. And that's kind of what I really loved about working there. And honestly, like one of the biggest questions that I have, or that people have for me, is how is it that you end up kind of making work overseas? How is it that you end up how do you work with creatives who don't speak the same language as you necessarily? Or how do you end up trying to find insights? And, it always comes down to this idea of you need to just get down to the truth. And I believe that humans are humans, no matter where we are in the world. We care about the same thing. Humans have the similar dreams, they have similar hopes, they have similar fears. And in the case of Nike, athletes are athletes. And I think it's always very helpful to refer to people as people and not as consumers, because if you think of people as consumers, you can get kind of tricked. It's a semantic thing, but I do think it's a bigger thing. I think when you remember that, when you're speaking to somebody as a mother, you can end up getting work like Procter and Gamble did. When you speak to somebody as an athlete, that's where you end up going into Nike. When you speak to somebody as a fan, you can end up in ESPN world. But I think that those truths and being able to speak to people on a human level are important, and particularly when it comes to working overseas, because you're working in what we would describe in our office as this sort of cultural hot pot. A hot pot, for those of you who don't know it, just quickly, is a Chinese dish. It's basically like a big cauldron of broth, and the broth, you have different types of broth, and the broth is made up of all sorts of ingredients, and the broth is used to cook. It's kind of like a fondue-ish sort of thing. And the broth is used to cook all sorts of meats and vegetables. So you throw all sorts of stuff in this thing. It's a big communal dish. It's delicious. It's fun. And we referred to our office as this cultural hot pot, because we did have people from all over the world. We had people from the UK, from France, from Germany, Brazil, Singapore, Malaysia, and then even in China. And you don't really have that sort of collective, let's say, American background, or if you're all from the UK, you have that sort of those cultural reference points. And there were definitely challenges for this, when it came to judging people's lines. If I, as a creative director, I would have Chinese creatives who were presenting work to me in a language that was not their first language, which is incredible. But I'd have to look at it and kind of say, well, I can't judge this based on the quality of the English because, you know, it might not sound good. So I had to, and maybe the Chinese version sounded good, but of course I'll never be able to read it. So I had to find we had to judge the lines based purely on the idea and the truth. So there's a challenge, but you got something out of it. I remember I had one of the global creative directors came and spoke to me about this challenge of that he had of, you know, when you're working in advertising, you're constantly trying to like move the bar forward. You're trying to push things forward and test new boundaries. And you'll often face resistance. You'll face resistance at home. But the challenge when you're working in a place that's not your home is the resistance I'm facing because is it a cultural resistance? Like, look, this idea won't translate, or is it because you're just the people that we're working with don't want to push the work, or it's unfamiliar to them. And that was always kind of the hardest thing to deal with. But you end up, you know, what you gain out of is, again, you get this sense of perspective. You are working in a place that is not your home. And at a certain point, you need to be like, look, in my case, as a white American dude, I won't understand this thing. So I'm gonna trust what you guys are saying and accept as true. And let's move on and find an idea that we're all gonna love. And then there's this, specifically in China, there's this notion of saving face, which, you know, it kind of exists everywhere, but it's very important there. People don't want to be embarrassed. There's a lot of pride, and they also don't want you to feel embarrassed. And so as someone who's in a leadership position there, what struck me is if I asked somebody to do something and they didn't know how to do it, they wouldn't tell me that they didn't know how to do it, and I would learn about it a few days later. Or if I said, hey, we're going to do this thing, it's going to be awesome, nobody wanted to tell me that thing you want to do isn't possible. And so I'd walk around for 2 days thinking that thing we're going to do is awesome. And then finally I'd be told later that it wasn't possible. But again, you kind of learn what your place is amongst all these different cultures, and you learn to navigate it, and it's fun. When it came to the actual work, though, I think what was super important for us was, and I think this speaks to anything, is you want to try to make work when you're going there that's culturally insightful and globally relevant. Culturally insightful, you want to find that truth that speaks to wherever it is that you are, and globally relevant in terms of you. I had this fear of going there that I was going to make work that just kind of felt like an inside joke. You know, I was worried that I would go to Shanghai for a couple of years and my portfolio was just going to be a bunch of Chinese work that didn't make sense and people weren't going to want to listen to, and it was a very niche. And so it was really important for us to try to find work that was true, that was held to a high standard and kind of spoke at a human level. And ultimately that kind of led to this sort of globally relevant work. And when it came to like actually finding those insights, the way we did it was based on this kind of thing that I believe is that I think a good brief is a trampoline instead of a box. It's not something that you should kind of fit into. It's not something that should be confining. As a creative, I love a brief where it's like there are many aspects of it that I can go almost like little launching pads. And so we made briefs that were essentially books, because we needed to you know, if we were going to do a presentation on Shanghai, or if we were doing a campaign in Shanghai, I want to know everything that was going on in Shanghai. I want to know the pop culture. I want to know the history. I want to know what other cities thought about Shanghai. I wanted to know, you know, what was going on the internet. What are people saying? And so that's kind of what our briefs became. And each one of those things became little like launching pads for us, like filled with different sort of like provocations. And each brief ended up, which was really exciting. And I think this is going to be the case no matter where you work. If you were to go overseas, each brief becomes an opportunity to like learn a little bit more about the place that you're living in. You know, I learned throughout this stuff that, you know, one of the biggest problems we had to solve when we were working on a Children's Day campaign was that parents don't want their kids to play sports, which is not something that, you know, that's a problem you need to solve that you're never going to have to solve here in the US. You don't really have, in the US, athletes are very much heroes. Nike kind of helped turn athletes into heroes. It's not like that there. And in fact, a big one was, if you do want to become a professional athlete, all like professional athlete schools are kind of government run programs. And people are plucked from like a young age and kind of put into these programs, like a basketball program or what have you. And it's a school still, but it's very much focused on basketball. And so you're kind of trained from a young age. So again, when you see a lot of sports spots in the US where it's a young kid who plays really hard and realizes his dream and becomes a professional athlete, that story doesn't make sense there. And the one particular anecdote is that I loved was there are these things called marriage markets that are in various cities, and this is a picture of one in Shanghai. And a marriage market is basically, it's all these umbrellas, and there's all these little pieces of paper on the umbrellas, and the pieces of paper are all resumes, descriptions of men and women. And all the people kind of with each umbrella, there's a bunch of grandmothers and grandfathers, and they're trying to play matchmaker for their granddaughters and grandsons who are adults. And I remember asking one of my colleagues, I was like, well, what's written on these things? Because it's all in Chinese and I couldn't read it. And they're like, oh, well, they'll say, what the name of the person is, how tall they are, what country they live in, what their job is, and they'll start kind of describing some characteristics. And I noted the thing that fascinated me about characteristics for the women was they would say, well, she's successful, but she's not too successful. She's ambitious and wealthy, but not too wealthy. She's beautiful, but not too beautiful. And I thought that was fascinating because China is actually a very progressive or fairly progressive country for women's rights. There are a lot of women in power, and women are told to be successful and to be ambitious. But there's this notion that we're learning of like within reason, and that like oftentimes men are intimidated by women who are too ambitious or are too successful. And so when we worked on our women's campaign, the idea for that ultimately kind of came from this sort of truth, which was if you're told you've gone too far, go further. And we found all these incredible stories of like the woman who was the captain of the national basketball team. She also had a PhD. Li Na is this incredible tennis player. She's the first Asian to have ever won a Grand Slam. And she was very ambitious, and she was criticized early on in her career. And again, I think what was really fascinating was each one of these, and partly it was because Nike is this sort of brand, but each brand was an opportunity to not just like make a piece of work, but to also like learn a little bit more about the culture. And that was kind of what was probably the thing that I enjoyed most about it. I'll kind of walk you through a few examples of things. This first campaign was this was the first thing I ever did when I was in China. Zhou Qi is he's a Chinese basketball player. He was signed to the Houston Rockets when I got there, and people were there was thought of like, oh, maybe he's going to be the next Yao Ming. The problem is he's not a good basketball player, and we had to do a campaign for him. And I remember the brief was something along the lines of like, he has a lot of haters online, so he's going to prove the haters wrong. And I remember thinking that it sounds like bullshit. Like, this guy's clearly not going to prove any haters wrong. So we need to think of a new way in. And my writer, I asked my writer, I was like, well, what are people saying about him? When you go online, what's the dialogue? And there's this saying, when you want to wish somebody good luck, if they're on, basically they're leaving home to go to school, or they're leaving home to or to go to a new city for work, you say don't come back, because you want them to have so much success in wherever they're going that they don't have to come back. And so people were telling Zhou Qi, hey, go to America and don't come back, meaning don't fail and come back here. And I thought that line was incredible. We're like, well, that's the spot. Let's elevate that conversation. And that's what this spot is.
哎，周琦，终于去美国了，可以啊你，过得开心吧？别回来了，
反正我们也不想让你留在这里。
你在这里赢过总冠军了，再去那里赢一个，别回来了。
要单程机票就够了。难道你去美国打球，就只是因为身高高吗？
别回来。回来帮国家队拿个冠军，然后马上回去。
咱们6点起床，可不是为了看你坐板凳上看比赛。
我觉得你成了我们，想做我的偶像，你要再努力一点。别回来，
想都别想。
让他们知道什么叫来者不善。
要不然我们就出手了。
Next one I want to talk about is, as we did a campaign for Shanghai. Shanghai is as I've said numerous times throughout this conversation, a really awesome city. This skyline, in fact, it's really funny, or it's not funny, but it's interesting. When we oftentimes, you hear this thing like Shanghai is not China. It's a very different sort of city from the rest of China. It's very it's far more Western. It's a very fast-paced city. It's developing quickly. This skyline, like 30 years ago, is basically just fields. I think there was that one building on the left, and it was just fields. So like the growth of this place, the adoption of technologies and fashion trends is fast-paced, and people from other cities apparently would kind of shit on Shanghai. And so what we wanted to do was kind of embrace it. And so with this spot, we embraced it from the perspective of this was for the Shanghai Marathon. And we did a campaign for them that kind of celebrate how Shanghai is always evolving, always pushing. It's never done. And so we did it from the perspective of the futility of a man who sells finish lines.
我和专卖终点线跟结束有关的，我都卖。08年马拉松用的超细纤维，有一种人生哲学叫见好就收，你能买到。我有个叔叔，只知道跑，他这一跑，再也没有回来。我当时要有一个终点线的话，所以我做了这个生意。凡事啊，总得有个度。可是，在上海停不下来。训练可以，有必要加练吗？亚瑟，小东东，我还没跑完呢。
And then this last one was the last thing I worked on there is for Chinese New Year, which is kind of like the Christmas of the UK or the Super Bowl of the US. It's all the brands kind of pull out all the stops, throw in tons of money, and they end up wanting to make a big spot. Usually they're fairly emotional, and they're usually about going home. Chinese New Year is the largest migration of humans every year on Earth, where I think it's like 1 billion people are basically leaving the cities they work in and returning home. And so we wanted to tell, this was Nike's first ever Chinese New Year commercial. And the idea came about when my creative team showed me this video that they had found online of these two old grandmothers arguing over a hongbao. And a hongbao is a red envelope that typically has money inside of it and is kind of given as a gift. It's given as a gift for all sorts of occasions, but particularly for New Year. And it's customary to kind of to give this gift, but it's equally as customary to kind of graciously polite that to decline it. It's almost like declining to pay the bill. Somebody's going to offer to pay the bill at a restaurant, and they're going to decline it. And so this spot was kind of an exaggeration and a play on that.
新年快乐！
我妈说不能收。哎呀，
已经放你兜里了。新年快乐！
谢谢姑姑，但我不能要。
乖，拿着。
不用了。
新年快乐！拿着上学用。
真的不用了。
拿着，还跟姑姑客气呢。
我哪有你客气啊？
毕业了，拿去玩。拿着。停一下，你先，没有先。别客气。红包。
行，谢谢姑，那咱回家吧。
我也行，好开心。
姑姑，新年快乐！不客气，不客气，不客气。
Cool. So those are those. This pretty much have talked about. It's great being an outsider. If you've never done it, you should give it a shot. It's wonderful. But this is another one. My first year, worked my ass off. I was consumed by work. I didn't travel as much as I wanted to. The second year we were there, we did a lot of it, and it made it all worth it. The Huangshan Mountains brought tears to my eyes. It was the most beautiful thing I think I've ever seen in my life. But I think that's the beauty of living overseas is, or, you know, honestly, wherever you go, just make sure you travel. Like, advertising is great, but like, make sure you take everything out of it. There's a quote I wanted to kind of give you right here. Is a buddy of mine who graduated with me. He works in the Shanghai office. Pioneers die from lots of shit, but rarely boredom. Living in a land where you're forced to learn new stuff every day just to eat food and find water ignites your brain, makes you realize how little you actually know and how much there is to learn, eat, explore, see, visit, and do. And then I know it looks like we're kind of almost over, but I have some like more nuts and bolts sort of thoughts of just like things to kind of consider. You know, if you're moving for work or life or both, it'll change it. You know, if you want to go to, it was a good opportunity, work opportunity for me, but it was also a good life opportunity as well. And I think, you know, it's something to kind of keep in mind as if you are interested in working overseas, knowing why you're going, and that'll help kind of inform the agency or the country that you want to go to. You can honestly do either. I went as a more senior position, and it was great. I was given a lot of responsibility. It helped kind of turbocharge my career. But one of my best friends who worked out there was a junior from the UK who's an art director who drunkenly decided that he wanted to move to Shanghai. 2 weeks later, he was in Shanghai. And now he has more work in his book that he knows what to deal with. And we were sometimes operating on shoestring budgets, and he was able to direct. And so he kind of became a director. So you can do whatever you want. Who are you working under? This is something that's true regardless. I think you should always respect the people who are above you, like their books, their taste. Make sure you got they're the ones who are going to help you grow, and they're also kind of the barriers between you, your work, and the world. You know, this I oftentimes will hear people who will say, "Oh, well, if I wasn't married, if I didn't have kids, I would do this." And yes, it's easier if you're single. It's really easy to just pick up and go somewhere. But I worked with people who had kids in Shanghai, who moved there with kids. You know, it was, you know, my wife came and she worked in Shanghai. It was definitely, I think, you know, difficult sometimes, like for her to find work and whatnot. But I think these are things that it doesn't mean it's too late. Like you can go and I think, you know, we knew a lot of people who wanted to raise their kids in China or anywhere in the world because it gives you that perspective. Being biased because I grew up in Kenya, so I think that works. Be seduced by the work, not the title. This is kind of the final thing. There's a lot of title inflation overseas. A lot of people were saying I shouldn't go because, oh, Skibiak, you're just getting this CD title because you're willing to move there. And it was probably true. But I knew that if I could like actually get work out of it, it would be good. And I think that it's an important thing to remember. Just because somebody's offering you this amazing title, if you're not going to get good work out of it, if you're traveling for the work, then it's not worth it. That's kind of the theme of this thing, right? Advertising will take your weekends, it'll take your hairline and waistline, but you can also get a lot out of it. You can have really cool life experiences. You can work with amazing people. It's an awesome job. You know, yeah, sure, it can be frustrating at times, but I think you just need to know how to like play with it. And then all you end up getting from working overseas is the love of the street dog. It'll be worth it. This guy's amazing. His name's Teddy. Street dogs in Shanghai are the cutest dogs in the world. Thank you guys. Sorry, I think I went a little bit over, but thank you.
Cool. Well, we'll open it up to questions in the chat if anybody wants to throw questions in there, but I'll go ahead and start it off because I know we do have a lot of students who are interested in working abroad. Yep. So how did you kind of navigate the cultural differences of the day-to-day, like working in the office when you went to Shanghai?
I mean, part of it was, I kind of touched on this, I guess, a little bit. The cultural differences were definitely real, and I think you just need to, with this job, benefits from you being curious. And I think as long as you're like, I knew people who lived in Shanghai who didn't like it, and they were stubborn because, well, this is how it works at home. Why can't it work like this? And if you go in there with that mentality, you're screwed. You're inevitably going to get angry. And so I think you kind of just need to be curious, ask questions. You need to have humility and perspective. You need to know that, like, hey, you're the foreigner, and I think those are honestly like and open to trying new things. And I think as long as you're doing those things, everything else is going to kind of fall into place.
Cool. We have a question from Grace. How do you attribute being chosen for the CD position abroad, especially if you've never outwardly expressed that you'd want to move abroad before? You know, like, why do you think you were chosen? Was it your willingness to take on anything, excitement for all types of work? Like, what was it that got you to where you are?
I have no idea. I think, I mean, it's a great question. So I was working with the Nike CDs in Portland, were the global creative directors, and I wasn't on the Nike account. I was actually on TurboTax and Facebook at the time, but I was working on a lot of Nike briefs. I was actually in a good position where the CDs liked me, and I was getting good briefs. And at some point, the CDs sat me down, and I thought they were going to ask me to join the Nike account full time. And they said, "Oh, would you want to be a creative director in Nike Shanghai?" And they were like, "This is not because we want to get rid of you." And I was like, "Well, I didn't really think that, but now I'm starting to think that might be the reason why." But I think honestly, I was just starting to begin to like lead, not be a CD in Portland, but kind of like lead pitches. And so I think that like, it was maybe a mix of that, but really it was just more like, they needed new creative directors in the Shanghai office. They asked the creative directors in Portland, and for some reason they thought of me. And I don't think they knew that I was going to say yes to it, but I did. And I ultimately, I was just kind of like, there was part of me that was like, am I ready to do this job yet? Am I ready to be a CD? I don't know. But I thought like, well, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, and they might be less qualified or just as qualified. So I might as well give it a shot. And that was kind of ultimately why I did it. But there wasn't anything like, I wasn't like the guy in the Portland office who was like game for anything. And then they're like, hey, let's throw him in China. I think it was just, you know, they're kind of, I guess I had the experience. Let's see, what would you tell a creative that wants to work with arts and letters, but also wants to travel and gain worldly experience? So I think, I mean, if you want to work at arts and letters, come work in arts and letters. It's an awesome place. And then I think, like, you know, I moved, you can work overseas. It kind of comes down to whether you want to, you know, go overseas as more junior or as a more senior person. Like, overseas will always be there. And you can always kind of go when you want to go. In terms of like arts and letters, as far as I'm aware, we're not opening a Shanghai office anytime soon or London office. But like I said early on, like, you can write a script that takes place anywhere in the world. With the exception of right now, I wouldn't do that. But maybe sometime in the near future, you can write a script and, you know, you can end up, or you write a script that has a lot of people in it, because that's really expensive to film in the US because of union dues. And so you end up usually going to like Prague to film stuff like that. So that's kind of cool too. Most agencies won't waste getting a visa for juniors. Is that true? How does that know? I don't know the answer to that question in terms of, I believe it. And I know in Shanghai, we probably at a certain point didn't bring, we had some juniors come out, but it was mostly like mid-level, I think was the lowest that we would bring out. So I think that is kind of a true, it's something to kind of keep in mind. And I think like that's always a conversation you can kind of have with recruiters. I went through my agency, and there are a lot of agencies that have kind of offices around the world, but it's a question you can kind of ask recruiters as well. And they'll probably have more of an insight. In terms of on an individual project, what's the distribution of international versus local talent? It was always local talent. Yeah, we would go through casting. The guy in the Shanghai spot is actually like a famous actor he's like a famous Shanghainese actor. I think he was described by somebody as like a local Jeff Goldblum. Who knows if that's true, but I'm like, all right, that sounds great. But he was awesome. But it was always local talent. And I think, you know, beyond that as well, you know, the dialects are like very different around across all of China. And so when we had people who were, when we were casting people from Beijing, they had to speak with a Beijing accent dialect. You know, when we were casting people from Shanghai, same thing. And then there's some regions where you know, people start looking a little different as well. And so if you want to get people from that region, we wanted to be very authentic to the regions. Thank you, Grace. Do you feel like as long as you're trying to grow and challenge yourself, you'll find the best solutions possible in your role? As long as you're trying to grow. Yeah, I mean, is this question kind of asking like, do I feel like you need to move overseas or something like that? I don't know. I think like, you know, I think it's always, for me, I'm always trying to look for where I think I can get the kind of the best work, or at least where there like the opportunity to make good work is. And I really do think that like pushing yourself to be uncomfortable is helpful, and it's not an easy thing. It's like it goes counterintuitive to what your survival instincts actually want you to do, but it, you know, it can be on a, like I was saying earlier on, just by virtue of like working with different CDs will kind of make you a little bit more, at least from a creative standpoint. But it could be like if you're a strategist, you're an account person, you're working with a different business director, you're working on a different account. You're always going to hopefully feel a little bit uncomfortable when you're changing, and I think that's going to challenge you and it's going to push you. yeah, I mean, at Wyden, I wasn't initially kind of concerned about being a creative director. I knew at some point that was something I think I wanted. But it was just like, there were so many incredible creative directors who've been doing the job for like 20 years. My goal was just like sap as much from that as I possibly could. Cool.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think our time is up. So have a good rest of your day.